So far, everything I've talked about in this series has concerned the visual component of cinema. Shot composition, camera angle, editing, and cinematography are all subcategories of this component. But film isn't comprised entirely of images. There's another entire dimension.
I bet you have.
Here's Johnny!
Sound. Most people would probably rank visuals higher than sound in terms of importance, but that's not always the case. Sound can often be just as critical as images in creating a movie's effect. David Lynch, who directed Mulholland Drive and Eraserhead, said that films are 50% visual and 50% sound. Sometimes sound even overplays the visual. Oftentimes, a film's audio is just as culturally significant as the images it accompanies. The classical music used in 2001: A Space Odyssey, for instance, is probably just as recognizable as some of the film's most memorable shots. The most important thing to keep in mind is that every component of a film, from the smallest detail to the most obvious visual technique, is an inalienable piece of the movie. We can't fully understand the impact of a film unless we consider it in its entirety. Sound is a part of this entirety. Although it might sometimes fall to the wayside in favor of visuals when we analyze movies, sound is still a piece of the puzzle, and without it, we won't have a complete picture. With that in mind, I want to explain a few key things you should keep in mind when analyzing how sound contributes to the effect of a film. The first thing I want to talk about has to do with whether the sound is a part of the world contained inside the film, or if it is one step removed from it. There's a term in filmmaking that explains this characteristic of sound. If a noise is diegetic, then it's a part of the film's world. This might include dialogue, or a gunshot, or a radio station playing in a car. Anything that actually exists within the film. Non-diegetic noises, on the other hand, exist outside of the film's world. They're anything that couldn't be heard within the actual scene. They might include voiceover or background music. Whether a sound is diegetic or non-diegetic can have a significant effect on the impact of a scene. If you see a group of soldiers making a charge on the battlefield with epic music playing in the background, that might generate a dramatic, emotional tone. If there's a shot of some people sitting in a car with the radio playing, the diegetic sound might work to create a grounded, realistic atmosphere and help the viewer to insert themselves into the scene. This characteristic of sound can also have some thematic significance. If something is happening within the film and creepy, subtle background music is playing, what thematic implications could that have? Perhaps it's signifying that an occurrence is otherworldly or supernatural in some way, that something isn't quite as it appears on the surface. The diegetic-non-diegetic divide is also sometimes used for comedic effect. For instance, a character might be completing some dramatic task with background music adding to the seriousness, and that music might be revealed to actually be playing in the film's world, toying with the viewer's assumptions to get a laugh. There are also some cases where the shift between diegetic and non-diegetic sound has some thematic meaning behind it. Check out this quick scene from Drive.
Thanks for staying. Love you, man. Salud.
The music starts off diegetic and muffled as we see Ryan Gosling's character. It becomes diegetic and clear when we get a look into the party next door. It becomes non-diegetic for both characters, and then returns to being diegetic and muffled as the two characters talk in the hallway. Perhaps the initial shift from diegetic and muffled to diegetic and clear expresses Gosling's desire to be with the woman, as it plays in the background when we see him but becomes a clear sound when we get a glimpse of her, as if she's echoing in the back of his mind. Or maybe it's meant to signify the increasing distance between the two characters, as the music that exists in her reality is obscured for him. Perhaps the shift to non-diegetic for both settings signifies their mutual feelings for each other. Whatever the effect is, this shift in sound plays a fundamental role in shaping the texture of the scene. Keep this diegetic idea in mind when analyzing sound. Think about how it generates a scene's atmosphere, how it might build towards some message of thematic significance, how it's used for comedic or dramatic effect, and how the shifts in the diegetic status of the sound build towards the film's message. Another dynamic critical to a movie's impact is its use of sound effects. Oftentimes, sound effects are used alongside images to build towards a particular atmosphere. A dripping faucet or a ticking clock might be used to heighten stress in a particularly tense scene. The rustling of trees might be used to generate a natural, organic atmosphere. Juxtaposition can also be an incredibly powerful tool in filmmaking, and sound effects can be critical to a film's ability to pull it off. Sometimes, sound effects are juxtaposed with a scene's ambient noise. That natural noise that I mentioned might be interrupted by brutal violence and gruesome sounds, shocking the viewer and keeping them on edge, and maybe working towards some thematic point about the harsh, unpredictable nature of nature. Sometimes the image on screen is juxtaposed with the sound accompanying it. In Hitchcock's The 39 Steps, for instance, a woman's scream is replaced with a train whistle. Perhaps this is used to signify how the woman's horror is drowned out by her overwhelming surroundings, or something like that. Sound effects are also employed to aid in transitions. This technique is sometimes referred to as a sound bridge. Nerdwriter has a great video on transitional sounds in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and I'd definitely recommend checking it out. The gist of it is that sounds are often used as a cutting point between shots, helping blend different scenes of Scott's life together into an unending string. This is important because the film itself is about how Scott is just drifting through life without paying much attention to his actions. When analyzing sound effects, consider how they work alongside images to generate an atmosphere, how they're juxtaposed both with other sound effects and with visuals to create an effect of thematic significance, and how they're used to transition between shots in a smooth, meaningful way. The last broad concept concerning sound that I want to talk about is its absence. Oftentimes, an obvious lack of noise can be just as noticeable, or more noticeable, than its presence. Films often employ silence in scenes of tragedy to emphasize the empty, shell-shocked feelings that characters are experiencing. They might throw in a heartbeat noise or some muffled dialogue, but oftentimes there's an obvious disparity between these climactic scenes and the other parts of the film. Silence is often used when a character does something embarrassing or unacceptable, and attracts some unwanted attention as a result. A character might say something controversial in a bar or restaurant, and then all of the other patrons stop what they're doing to turn and look at them. This has been used so much that it's become a trope often used for comedic effect. An action sequence might have very little sound to raise its tension, like this scene from Drive. Some films have used silence on a larger scale to great effect. No Country for Old Men by the Coen brothers, for instance, has virtually no music during its 2-hour runtime, perhaps to emphasize the loneliness of the setting and to heighten tension throughout. While considering the effect of a movie's sound, also consider scenes where an absence of sound is employed, as it can be just as important to the movie's impact. There are a few smaller ideas that are worth looking out for when you analyze sound. One is whether the sound is simultaneous or non-simultaneous. Simultaneous sound makes up the majority of audio in most movies, and it refers to sound that takes place at the same point in time as the visuals on screen. If you're watching a standard shot reverse shot conversation, that would be simultaneous sound because you're hearing what you see happening. Non-simultaneous sound refers to audio that doesn't match up with what's happening on screen, as it occurs at a different point in time. In this sequence,
Call back, will you?
You guys heard from me?
Roger, I spoke to the manager of the Cat Scratch Club. She
Hey,
hasn't
Roger,
shown
you
up
there?
for work in a long time.
Look, I just went to the
Almost a
police
month.
station and I filed a missing persons report. And I spoke to a friend of Mimi's who said that she saw her about 3
She
weeks
hasn't
ago.
picked up her AZT in a while.
But she said she's been living on the street.
Couple weeks.
Living on the
It's
street.
Collins again. I should be heading back home soon, like right around Christmas.
I'm really starting to get worried.
the actual sounds of the scene are replaced with phone conversations. Consider how a director might manipulate the synchronization between sound and visuals in order to influence how the audience views a sequence. Voiceover is a technique that can be used to establish a film's context or to create a rapport between the audience and a character, like this sequence from The Big Short.
Loans, tranches. It's pretty confusing, right? Does it make you feel bored or stupid? Well, it's supposed to. Wall Street loves to use confusing terms to make you think only they can do what they do.
If voiceover is used in a film, think about how it manipulates the movie's tone and feel and how it functions as a storytelling device. It can profoundly change how the audience internalizes a story, as being directly addressed by a character is very different from seeing an event unfold on screen. A sonic flashback is the reuse of a snippet of sound from earlier in the film, like this scene from Blade Runner.
Too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?
These can be used to add significance to a seemingly small remark or moment from earlier in the film, as the knowledge the viewer gains throughout its runtime enables them to see why it actually matters. It can also help to create a sense of continuity for the film, tying its later scenes to its earlier ones and making it feel like more of a unified piece, rather than just a long string of events. I'm not going to go into any more detail with these techniques right now because they have a lot of interesting functions and are worthy of their own videos, but they're good things to look out for when you're watching a film. I hope this has given you a good overview of some things to think about when analyzing film sound. I say this at the end of pretty much every one of these videos, but this is just a survey of a huge category of filmmaking. There's a whole lot more that's worth looking into, but I think this provides a good foundational knowledge for the most important things to consider. Don't get tunnel vision when you're thinking about movies. There's more to a film than just visuals, and to get its full effect you need to consider all of the information it's throwing at you. Some might think of sound as secondary to images in this medium, but it's a whole dimension to the form that should not be ignored.